In March 2026, New Delhi, the capital of India, hosted a diplomatic event that drew global attention. Hardeep Singh Puri, India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, and officials from the U.S. Department of Energy formally signed a 5-year long-term liquefied petroleum gas (LPG) supply agreement. The signing of this agreement marked a new phase in India-U.S. cooperation in the energy sector and added new substance to the strategic partnership between the two countries. Under the terms of the agreement, the United States will supply India with a total of 12 million metric tons of LPG over the next 5 years, averaging 2.4 million metric tons annually. This LPG will primarily be shipped from production facilities along the U.S. Gulf Coast and transported by sea to major Indian ports to meet the country's growing domestic energy demand. Notably, this agreement is the first structured LPG procurement contract signed between the United States and India for the Indian market. The procurement volume accounts for approximately 10% of India's annual LPG imports. Compared to the previous sporadic energy trade cooperation between India and the United States, this long-term agreement offers greater stability and strategic significance. It not only clarifies the rights and obligations of both parties, but also establishes a regularized cooperation mechanism, including core provisions such as price benchmarking, supply guarantee clauses, quality inspection standards, and emergency supply contingency plans. The agreement explicitly stipulates that the LPG purchase price will be benchmarked against the market price in Mount Belvieu, Texas. This benchmark ensures price transparency and fairness while mitigating price volatility risks during India's procurement process to some extent, thereby providing stable expectations for India's long-term energy procurement planning. Furthermore, the agreement includes supply security provisions stipulating that, under exceptional circumstances, such as global energy supply shortages or escalating geopolitical conflicts, the United States will prioritize LPG supplies to India to ensure the stability of India's domestic energy supply. Concurrently, the two sides will establish a technical cooperation mechanism through which the United States will provide India with advanced technologies for LPG storage, transportation, and utilization, helping India enhance energy efficiency and secure its strategic reserves. The signing of this agreement is not a coincidence, but rather an inevitable outcome resulting from the combined influence of multiple factors, including strategic considerations, economic needs, and geopolitical dynamics. It will not only profoundly reshape India's energy security landscape, but also trigger far-reaching ripple effects on U.S.-India bilateral relations, the global energy market, and the regional geopolitical landscape. To truly grasp the underlying logic of this agreement, one must begin by examining the energy security challenges India currently faces, and then systematically analyze its strategic significance, economic implications, geopolitical dynamics, and domestic political factors. As the world's third-largest oil importer and second-largest consumer of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, India has long faced severe energy security challenges. Issues such as high dependence on energy imports, a narrow range of supply channels, and escalating geopolitical risks are intertwined, severely constraining the sustainable development of India's economy and the stability of its national security. Moreover, the persistently high dependence on natural gas, including LPG imports, has become one of the greatest vulnerabilities in India's energy security. According to the Energy Report for the 2025 to 2026 fiscal year released by India's Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas, India's current natural gas import dependency stands at 65%. As a key component of natural gas, LPG's import dependency exceeds 70%, with domestic LPG production meeting only about 30% of market demand, while the remaining 70% must be met through imports. India's domestic natural gas reserves are limited, with proven reserves of approximately 1.3 trillion cubic meters, accounting for just 0.6% of global reserves. Furthermore, extraction is technically challenging and costly, making it impossible to meet the country's growing energy demands. With India's sustained economic development, accelerating urbanization, and the implementation of policies to improve people's livelihoods, domestic LPG demand has shown a year-on-year upward trend. In particular, the Modi government's Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana initiative, which aims to provide an additional 2.5 million LPG connections to adult women in low-income households. This policy has further expanded domestic demand for LPG and deepened India's reliance on imported LPG. More critically, India's natural gas import channels are highly concentrated and overly dependent on the Middle East, making its energy supply highly vulnerable to geopolitical conflicts and extremely unstable. Statistics show that 60% of India's crude oil imports and over 85% of its LNG imports originate from the Middle East, with more than 65% of these shipments transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. The situation for LPG imports is similar. Middle Eastern countries such as Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are India's primary LPG suppliers, accounting for over 80% of India's total LPG imports. As one of the world's most critical energy transport corridors, the Strait of Hormuz handles approximately 30% of global oil shipments. Its shipping security directly determines the stability of India's energy supply. Since 2026, the situation in the Middle East has deteriorated sharply. The conflict between Iran and Israel has continued to escalate, with Iran repeatedly threatening to block the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israeli military strikes and U.S. sanctions, posing a serious threat to energy shipments passing through the strait. As the conflict continues to escalate, several international energy suppliers have invoked force majeure clauses to suspend natural gas and LPG supplies to India. This has led to temporary shortages of LPG domestically, with some regions even experiencing panic buying, further exacerbating India's energy security crisis. Beyond the impact of geopolitical conflicts, India's energy imports are also hampered by issues, such as an irrational procurement model and insufficient storage capacity, further deepening its energy security predicament. Unlike countries such as Japan and South Korea, which are similarly highly dependent on energy imports, India has long relied on spot market purchases for its energy imports. Long-term contracts account for less than 30% of its imports, with over 70% sourced from the spot market. This leaves India with no choice but to passively accept high prices during global energy price fluctuations, unable to lock in costs through long-term agreements. Since 2026, driven by factors such as the Middle East conflict and a rebound in global energy demand, international LPG prices have surged significantly. India's cost of procuring LPG on the spot market has risen by more than 25% year on year. This has not only increased India's foreign exchange expenditures, but also driven up domestic energy prices, exacerbating inflationary pressures. At the same time, India's LPG storage capacity is severely inadequate. As of the end of 2025, India's total LPG storage capacity stood at approximately 1.93 million metric tons, sufficient to cover only about 22 days of supply, far below the internationally recognized standard of 90 days of safety reserves. Although India plans to add 326,000 metric tons of storage capacity over the next said years, and is advancing the construction of the Kanla-Godapur long-distance pipeline to improve transportation efficiency. These measures will not resolve the current shortage of storage capacity in the short term, leaving the country unable to effectively respond to emergencies such as supply disruptions. Furthermore, India has minimal global oil and gas asset holdings. As of 2025, production from overseas oil and gas interests accounted for less than 5% of total imports. The lack of its own upstream resources has resulted in extremely low bargaining power in the international energy market, and supply arrangements dictated by the global market. This energy security dilemma, compounded by multiple factors, has created an urgent need for India to diversify its energy supply channels and reduce its reliance on the Middle East. Signing a long-term LPG supply agreement with the United States is a crucial step for India in addressing this energy security challenge. While the recent India-U.S. LPG supply agreement may appear to be a simple energy trade partnership on the surface, it actually embodies profound strategic considerations. For India, the core strategic significance of this agreement lies in reducing energy dependence on the Middle East, strengthening strategic cooperation with the United States, and balancing China's influence in the region and globally. These three elements are interrelated and mutually reinforcing, collectively serving India's strategic objectives as a major power. First, from the perspective of energy security strategy, this agreement represents a crucial step for India in advancing the diversification of its energy supply, effectively reducing dependence on the Middle East and enhancing the stability of its energy supply. For a long time, India's energy supply has been highly dependent on the Middle East. This single-source supply structure makes India's energy security highly vulnerable to geopolitical conflicts in the region, should shipping safety in the Strait of Hormuz be compromised. India would face the risk of energy supply disruptions. As a major global producer and exporter of LPG, the United States possesses ample production capacity and stable supply capabilities. In the first 8 months of 2025, U.S. LPG exports rose by 22% year on year, with Asia emerging as its fastest growing market. Following the signing of a long-term LPG supply agreement with the United States, India will gradually reduce its reliance on LPG imports from the Middle East, lowering the region's share of supply from over 80% to around 65%, while increasing the supply share from other regions such as the United States and Russia. This will create a diversified energy supply structure, effectively mitigating geopolitical risks and enhancing the stability and security of energy supplies. As Hardeep Singh Puri, India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas stated, "This agreement is a crucial step for India to diversify LPG supplies and ensure energy security, and will provide the Indian public with a safer and more affordable supply of LPG. Secondly, from the perspective of bilateral strategic cooperation, the LPG supply agreement serves as a vital link for India and the United States to strengthen cooperation within the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, QUAD, and deepen their strategic partnership. The QUAD comprises the United States, Japan, India, and Australia, with its core objectives being to address regional security challenges and maintain stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. Energy cooperation, as a key component of the QUAD, has consistently been a priority area for collaboration among the four nations. In recent years, the United States has been committed to courting India, hoping to strengthen India's role within the Quad through energy and military cooperation, thereby promoting the deepening of the Quad mechanism and advancing its strategic positioning in the Indo-Pacific region. India, for its part, hopes to leverage the Quad mechanism to secure U.S. technological, financial, and military support, enhance its international standing and regional influence, and achieve its goal of emerging as a major power. The signing of this LPG supply agreement between India and the United States not only marks an upgrade in bilateral energy cooperation, but also represents a further deepening of the Quad cooperation mechanism. It will foster closer energy ties between the two nations and lay the groundwork for collaboration in other sectors. At the same time, this agreement will strengthen India's voice within the Quad, enabling it to play a greater role in the strategic landscape of the Indo-Pacific region, and form closer strategic coordination with the United States, Japan, Australia, and other nations to jointly address regional security challenges. Finally, from a geostrategic perspective, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement is also a significant move by India to counterbalance China's influence. In recent years, China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region has continued to expand. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has established close economic and trade partnerships with multiple countries in the region, particularly deepening cooperation in sectors such as energy and infrastructure development, a development that has placed immense strategic pressure on India. India has long viewed China as a regional rival and fears that the expansion of China's influence will threaten its own regional dominance. Consequently, it has consistently sought to counterbalance China's influence by strengthening cooperation with the United States, Japan, and other nations. The signing of the LPG supply agreement between India and the United States essentially represents India's effort to leverage U.S. power to strengthen its own energy security and economic strength, thereby enhancing its bargaining power in its strategic competition with China. By deepening energy cooperation with the United States, India can not only secure a stable energy supply, and access advanced energy technologies, but also strengthen strategic coordination with the United States, creating a strategic check on China in the Indo-Pacific region, and balancing China's influence both regionally and globally. At the same time, India hopes this agreement will signal to the international community its deepening cooperation with the United States, thereby elevating its international standing, attracting more nations to engage with India, and further isolating China. This strategic calculation aligns with India's Look East policy pursued in recent years. Both represent crucial measures through which India seeks to balance China's influence and achieve its rise as a major power by strengthening cooperation with Western nations. Beyond its profound strategic significance, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will also have a significant positive impact on India's economic development. The most direct impact will be a reduction in India's energy costs, saving the country a substantial amount of foreign exchange expenditure. It will also support the development of India's chemical industry and drive the optimization and upgrading of India's economic structure. According to the Indian government's estimates, this 5-year LPG supply agreement with a total volume of 12 million metric tons is expected to save India approximately $8 billion in foreign exchange expenditures, averaging $1.6 billion in annual savings. These cost savings stem primarily from two factors. First, the LPG purchase price stipulated in the agreement is benchmarked against the market price in Mont Belvieu, USA. Compared to LPG prices in the Middle East, U.S. LPG prices offer a certain advantage, especially against the backdrop of significant global energy price fluctuations. A long-term agreement helps India lock in procurement costs and avoid increased expenditures due to sharp spikes in spot market prices. Second, the transportation costs for U.S. LPG are relatively low. Shipping routes from ports along the U.S. Gulf Coast to major Indian ports are relatively short and secure, effectively reducing both transportation costs and risks, thereby further lowering India's procurement costs. Since 2026, India's foreign exchange reserves have continued to decline. As of the end of March, the reserves had decreased by 12% compared to the end of 2025, falling to approximately $580 billion, with foreign exchange pressure intensifying. The $8 billion in foreign exchange savings generated by this agreement will effectively alleviate India's foreign exchange pressure and provide additional financial support for India's economic development. More importantly, as a key chemical feedstock, the stable and low-cost supply of LPG will provide strong support for the development of India's chemical industry, driving its upgrading and growth. India's chemical industry is one of the key pillars of the Indian economy, accounting for approximately 7% of India's GDP. It spans multiple sectors, including petrochemicals, fine chemicals, and pharmaceutical chemicals. LPG is one of the core raw materials in the petrochemical industry, widely used in the production of basic chemical products such as ethylene and propylene. These basic chemical products are further utilized in the production of downstream products like plastics, rubber, and fibers, serving industries such as automotive, electronics, construction, and pharmaceuticals. For a long time, India's chemical industry has faced challenges such as unstable raw material supplies, excessive costs, and outdated technology, which have severely constrained its development. The signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will provide the Indian chemical industry with a stable, low-cost supply of raw materials, effectively resolving the issue of insufficient raw material availability. On the one hand, a stable supply of LPG will ensure that Indian chemical enterprises can maintain normal production, avoiding forced shutdowns or production cuts due to raw material shortages, thereby improving production efficiency and capacity utilization. On the other hand, a low-cost supply of LPG will reduce production costs for chemical enterprises, enhance their market competitiveness, encourage increased investment in R&D, elevate technological standards, and facilitate industrial upgrading. At the same time, the increased LPG supply will also drive the refinement of the Indian chemical industry's industrial chain, attract more upstream and downstream enterprises to invest in establishing factories, create an industrial cluster effect, and propel the Indian chemical industry toward high-end and specialized development, further enhancing its competitiveness in the global market. Furthermore, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will have a positive impact on improving people's livelihoods and economic growth in India. As a clean and efficient energy source, LPG is widely used in Indian households for cooking, heating, and other daily necessities, particularly in rural areas. The widespread adoption of LPG can effectively improve living conditions for rural residents, reduce the use of traditional biomass energy, and lower environmental pollution. With the implementation of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement, domestic LPG supply in India will become more abundant, and prices will stabilize, further promoting the adoption of LPG in rural areas, improving the quality of life for rural residents, and simultaneously reducing environmental pollution to help India achieve its carbon neutrality goals. From an economic growth perspective, lower energy costs will drive down costs across multiple sectors in India, including manufacturing and agriculture, thereby enhancing the competitiveness of various industries and stimulating economic growth. According to the Indian government's projections, with the stabilization of LPG supply and reduced costs, the output value of India's chemical industry is expected to grow by more than 30% over the next 5 years, contributing 1.2 to 1.5 percentage points to GDP growth. This will also create a significant number of jobs, alleviating India's employment pressures. In March 2026, India's unemployment rate rose to 7.8%, with youth unemployment reaching as high as 23.5%, creating immense employment pressure. The development of the chemical industry driven by the LPG supply agreement is expected to create 80,000 to 100,000 new direct jobs in India, while also stimulating the creation of more indirect jobs in upstream and downstream industries, effectively alleviating employment pressure and stabilizing social order. The signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will not only impact bilateral relations between India and the U.S. and India's domestic development, but will also trigger global geopolitical competition, producing far-reaching ripple effects on U.S.-Russia relations, U.S.-China competition, and regional cooperation in South Asia, thereby reshaping the regional and global geopolitical landscape. First, regarding U.S.-Russia relations, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will further intensifying geopolitical competition between the two nations and impact their strategic rivalry in the energy sector. As a major global energy exporter, Russia has long been a key energy supplier to India, particularly following the outbreak of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russia has leveraged its pricing advantage to supply India with cheap crude oil and natural gas, becoming a vital supplement to India's energy supply. The signing of a long-term LPG supply agreement between India and the U.S. implies that India will gradually increase its energy imports from the U.S., potentially reducing imports from Russia. This will undoubtedly harm Russia's energy interests and provoke Russian dissatisfaction. In fact, following the announcement of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov immediately denounced the move as hegemony, not trade, accusing the U.S. of using economic leverage to squeeze Russia's geopolitical influence and disrupting the previously balanced India-Russia energy relationship. Lavrov further pointed out that while the U.S. imposes sanctions on Russia, it secretly imports nuclear materials and fertilizers from Russia itself. This double standard severely undermines the international energy trade order. Russia's reaction indicates that the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will further intensify tensions between the U.S. and Russia, making the strategic competition between the two nations in the energy sector even more intense. India, caught between the U.S. and Russia, faces a dilemma. It must maintain strategic cooperation with the U.S. while avoiding completely alienating Russia and losing access to affordable energy supplies. Second, from the perspective of U.S.-China competition, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement is a key move by the U.S. to court India and contain China, which will further intensify strategic competition between the U.S. and China in the Indo-Pacific region. In recent years, the United States has been committed to advancing its Indo-Pacific strategy, seeking to court countries such as India, Japan, and Australia to form a strategic containment of China, with energy cooperation serving as a key tool for the U.S. to win over India. The signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement not only deepens energy cooperation between the two nations, but also strengthens their strategic coordination, causing India to lean more toward the United States in the U.S.-China competition and become a significant force in America's efforts to contain China. This will further intensify geopolitical competition between the U.S. and China in the Indo-Pacific region, and the rivalry between the two nations in the fields of energy, military affairs, and trade will become even more intense. At the same time, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will also impact trilateral relations among China, the U.S., and India. As a major global energy consumer and producer, China has extensive room for cooperation with India in the energy sector. However, the deepening of energy cooperation between India and the U.S. may affect Sino-Indian energy cooperation and exacerbate strategic competition between China and India. However, India will not fully align itself with the United States, but will instead adopt a balanced diplomacy strategy to maximize its interests between the two powers. It will leverage U.S.'s influence to counterbalance China's influence without completely abandoning cooperation with China, as China remains a vital trading partner. And Sino-Indian economic and trade cooperation is of significant importance to India's economic development. Finally, from the perspective of South Asian regional cooperation, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will reshape the region's energy landscape and influence the trajectory of regional cooperation. As a major power in South Asia, adjustments to India's energy policy will have significant implications for other countries in the region. Following the signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement, India's energy supply will become more stable and cost-effective. This will enhance India's influence in South Asia, enabling it to play a more dominant role in regional cooperation. At the same time, India may resell a portion of the LPG to other South Asian nations, thereby promoting energy cooperation in the region, strengthening economic ties with its neighbors, and consolidating its dominant position in South Asia. However, this situation may also trigger concerns among other South Asian nations who fear that India might leverage its energy advantage to control the region's energy supply, thereby exacerbating geopolitical tensions in South Asia. Furthermore, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement may encourage other South Asian countries to strengthen energy cooperation with the United States, prompting greater U.S. involvement in South Asian affairs, altering the region's geopolitical landscape and intensifying strategic competition in South Asia. At the same time, China's energy cooperation in South Asia may also be affected. China's energy partnerships with South Asian nations such as Pakistan and Bangladesh may face greater challenges as India-U.S. cooperation deepens. And the region's energy landscape will enter a new phase of strategic competition. No major foreign policy initiative or cooperation agreement is immune to the influence of domestic political factors, and the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement is no exception. For the Modi administration, signing this agreement holds not only strategic and economic significance, but also yields significant political dividends, helping the government consolidate its hold on power and win voter support. However, the agreement has also faced strong criticism from India's domestic opposition parties, who argue that this move by the Modi administration leads to India's over-reliance on the United States, undermining India's national sovereignty and economic security, and sparking domestic political controversy. Since coming to power, the Modi government has been committed to advancing India's rise as a major power, proposing strategic goals such as Make in India and energy independence. The signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement aligns perfectly with these strategic objectives and can yield significant political benefits for the Modi government. First, this agreement can effectively alleviate India's energy security challenges, ensure the stability of domestic energy supplies, and reduce energy costs. This will improve living conditions for the Indian people, reduce public discontent caused by energy shortages and price hikes, and win public support. Particularly in rural areas, stable LPG supplies and lower prices will directly benefit the vast rural population. As rural residents constitute India's largest voter bloc, accounting for approximately 40% of the total electorate, securing their support will lay a solid foundation for the Modi administration in upcoming elections. Second, the signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will strengthen strategic cooperation between India and the United States, elevate India's international standing, and highlight the Modi government's diplomatic achievements. The Modi government has consistently sought to enhance India's international influence by strengthening cooperation with Western nations such as the United States and Japan, with the aim of securing a permanent seat on the UN Security Council and realizing the goal of rising as a major power. The signing of a long-term LPG supply agreement with the United States is a significant manifestation of the deepening strategic cooperation between India and the U.S. It demonstrates India's diplomatic strength to the international community and elevates India's international standing, which will serve as a major diplomatic achievement for the Modi government and help it gain voter approval. Furthermore, this agreement will drive the development of India's chemical industry, create a large number of jobs, and alleviate India's employment pressures, all of which are key factors in the Modi government's efforts to win voter support. 2026 is a year of state elections in India, with legislative elections scheduled in multiple states. Issues such as agriculture, employment, and energy have become central campaign themes. By signing the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement to address energy shortages, reduce energy costs, and create jobs, the Modi government will undoubtedly boost its approval ratings, gain an advantage in the state elections, and lay the groundwork for the 2029 general elections. However, this move by the Modi government has also drawn fierce criticism from India's domestic opposition parties. The opposition argues that the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement leads to India's over-reliance on the United States, undermines India's national sovereignty and economic security, and constitutes a compromise with the United States by the Modi government. India's main opposition party, the Indian National Congress, has been the primary voice of criticism. Congress President Rahul Gandhi has repeatedly lambasted the Modi government in public, accusing Modi of being as soft as tofu in his cooperation with the United States, and of betraying the nation's sovereignty with no backbone whatsoever. Rahul Gandhi pointed out that while the Modi government has been taking a tough stance against China in recent years, even threatening to decouple from the Chinese economy, it now relies excessively on U.S. energy supplies, effectively handing over India's energy lifeline to the United States. He described this as a contradiction, essentially a desperate move by the Modi government unable to resolve domestic energy and economic crises. The Congress Party also accused the Modi government of failing to fully consult Parliament and the public before signing the agreement, making decisions unilaterally that have undermined India's democratic system and national interests. In addition to the Congress Party, conservative factions within the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, have also voiced opposition to the agreement. Conservative lawmakers have repeatedly spoken out against it in Parliament, arguing that increasing reliance on U.S. energy will lead to a further expansion of American political and economic influence over India, thereby threatening India's national sovereignty and economic security. Adhering to Hindu nationalist ideology, these conservatives maintain a vigilant and hostile stance toward the United States. They point out that the U.S. pursues a hegemonic America First policy, and that so-called energy cooperation is merely a means for the U.S. to co-opt and control India. They argue that once India becomes overly dependent on U.S.'s energy supplies, the U.S. will seize the opportunity to impose further political and economic demands on India, thereby harming India's national interests. Furthermore, conservatives worry that over-reliance on U.S. LPG supplies will cause India to neglect the development of its domestic energy sector, further exacerbating dependence on energy imports and hindering the achievement of India's goal of energy independence. Some domestic civil society organizations and nationalist groups in India have also voiced opposition to the agreement, organizing small-scale protests to demand That the Modi government protect India's national sovereignty, reject over-reliance on the United States, and promote the development of the domestic energy industry. In the face of criticism from opposition parties and domestic controversy, the Modi government has repeatedly defended the agreement, emphasizing that signing the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement is a crucial measure for India to diversify its energy supply and ensure energy security, and does not constitute over-reliance on the United States. The Modi government stated that India's energy policy has always adhered to the principle of diversification. Signing the LPG supply agreement with the United States is merely part of India's strategy to diversify its energy supply. India will not abandon energy cooperation with other countries, such as Russia and the Middle East, but will continue to advance the diversification of energy supplies. To mitigate the risks associated with reliance on a single supply channel, Hardeep Singh Puri, India's Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, also stated that this agreement is the result of India's independent choice, aligns with India's national interests, and will bring tangible economic and strategic benefits to India. At the same time, India will maintain its diplomatic independence and will not be controlled by any country. Furthermore, the Modi administration pointed out that the opposition's criticism stems largely from domestic political disputes and constitutes malicious accusations aimed at attacking the government and winning votes, rather than a genuine concern for India's national interests. In fact, the Modi administration's defense is not without merit. While signing the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement, India has continued to maintain energy cooperation with Russia, the Middle East, and other nations, seeking to strike a balance among major powers to maximize its interests. For example, while state-owned refineries have reduced purchases of Russian oil, they continue to maintain energy trade with Russia through private sector arbitrage. On the surface, this appears to comply with U.S. demands. But behind the scenes, India has not completely severed its energy dependence on Russia. This strategy of reducing but not stopping essentially allows India to keep its options open. At the same time, India is actively promoting the development of its domestic energy sector, intensifying natural gas exploration and development, and increasing domestic LPG production in an effort to gradually reduce its reliance on energy imports and achieve the goal of energy independence. However, it cannot be denied that the signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement has indeed increased India's dependence on the United States to some extent, particularly in the energy sector. Should tensions arise in India-U.S. relations, India's energy supply would face new risks, a point that lies at the core of the opposition's criticism. Overall, the 5-year LPG supply agreement signed by India and the U.S. in March 2026, with a total supply volume of 12 million tons, is a complex collaboration that integrates strategic considerations, economic needs, geopolitical maneuvering, and domestic political factors. It is not only a significant milestone in the deepening of India-U.S. relations, but will also have far-reaching implications for India's energy security, economic development, and international standing, while simultaneously triggering a chain reaction of geopolitical consequences on a global scale. Essentially, this agreement represents a pragmatic choice for India amid its energy security challenges, as well as a strategic move to leverage U.S. power to achieve great power status and counterbalance China's influence. Meanwhile, the United States uses this agreement to further cut India, strengthen its strategic footprint in the Indo-Pacific region, squeezed Russia's geopolitical influence, and advance its own strategic objectives. For India, this agreement has positive aspects. It can help India resolve its energy security dilemma, reduce energy costs, promote the development of the chemical industry, enhance its international standing, and bring political dividends to the Modi administration. However, there are also potential risks. Over-reliance on U.S. energy supplies may undermine India's national sovereignty and economic security, spark domestic political controversy, and potentially place India in a dilemma between the U.S. and Russia, or the U.S. and China. Looking ahead, the implementation of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement still faces numerous uncertainties. On the one hand, external factors such as price volatility in the global energy market, shifts in the Middle East, and the evolution of U.S.-Russia relations could all impact the agreement's effectiveness, potentially preventing India from securing a stable, low-cost supply of LPG as scheduled. On the other hand, internal factors, including domestic political resistance, inadequate energy infrastructure, and a lagging development of India's domestic energy sector, may also hinder the agreement's implementation and undermine the economic and strategic benefits it promises. Furthermore, how India maintains a balance between the US and Russia, as well as the US and China, how it avoids over-reliance on the US, and how it leverages this agreement to drive the development of its domestic energy sector and achieve the goal of energy independence. These are all critical issues the Modi administration must confront and resolve. The signing of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement marks a new dimension in India-U.S. relations, with energy cooperation becoming a key pillar of the two countries' strategic partnership, while also reshaping the global energy market and geopolitical landscape. For India, this agreement represents a strategic gamble, a bet that the United States will provide stable energy supplies and strategic support, and a bet that India can maximize its interests amid the great power rivalry. For the United States, this agreement is a crucial step in its Indo-Pacific strategy, aimed at courting India through energy cooperation to strengthen its control over the Indo-Pacific region, contain China, and squeeze Russia. Globally, this agreement will intensify geopolitical rivalry among major powers, impact the stability and development of the global energy market, and serve as a reference for other nations. In the context of globalization, energy security has become a vital component of national security for all countries. Diversifying energy supplies and strengthening international cooperation are key pathways to resolving energy security challenges. But nations must also remain vigilant against the risks of over-reliance on a single country and maintain their independence and autonomy. We can foresee that during the 5-year implementation period of the agreement, energy cooperation between India and the U.S. will deepen further, and collaboration in other sectors will advance accordingly. However, numerous challenges and controversies will also arise. Domestic political divisions in India, the strategic rivalry between the U.S. and Russia, and the competition between the U.S. and China will all impact the effectiveness of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement and influence the trajectory of India-U.S. relations. For the Modi administration, key challenges will include balancing strategic, economic, and domestic political interests, maintaining independence amid great power rivalry, and leveraging this agreement to drive India's economic development and emergence as a major power. Globally, the strategic considerations and geopolitical dynamics underlying the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement will remain a focal point of international attention, and the ripple effects it triggers will continue to shape the evolution of global energy markets and the geopolitical landscape. Furthermore, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement offers important insights for China. As the world's largest energy consumer and producer, China also faces energy security challenges. How to further diversify energy supplies, strengthen energy cooperation with other nations, and simultaneously maintain its own energy independence are issues China must address. At the same time, China should closely monitor the development of India-U.S. relations and the implementation of the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement, actively adjust its own energy strategy and diplomatic approach, strengthen energy cooperation with countries such as India, the United States, and Russia, and promote the stability and development of the global energy market. China must also remain vigilant against U.S. attempts to co-opt India to contain China and safeguard its own strategic interests and geopolitical security. In summary, the India-U.S. LPG supply agreement is not merely a simple energy trade deal. It embodies profound strategic considerations and complex geopolitical maneuvering. It reflects the respective strategic objectives of India and the United States, and serves as a microcosm of the rivalry among global powers. The implementation of this agreement will have far-reaching implications for India, the United States, and the world at large, and its future trajectory warrants our continued attention. In any case, energy security is a shared challenge for all nations. Only through strengthened international cooperation, the promotion of diversified energy supplies, and a commitment to mutual benefit and win-win outcomes can we achieve stability and sustainable development in the global energy market, thereby better safeguarding the energy security and economic development of all nations.